Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. Previously on the podcast, I discussed tips for trying to get acceptances in Lit Mag's journals and presses. Just some of the things you should take in consideration, yeah? So listen back, and I'll just reiterate this. Always read the guidelines, for sure. I can't tell you how many times, again, that I've seen others just not read the guidelines. So, yeah. Anyways, I was doing some searching recently on, how many episodes existed on editors-in-chiefs of magazines, lit mags, are out there. There are a couple out there, on YouTube and other podcasts. So what I want to do for this episode is to share, how do you start your own lit mag journal press? Because I think a lot of, people perhaps think about doing it, but they don't. Now, if you're going to do it, you absolutely have to be passionate about the literary arts world, right? You have to be passionate about writing and art. You can do it. You don't necessarily need 15, 20 years of experience of editing. I don't have that anyways. I started Dipity back in, and for sharing, if you're listening to this episode the first time, I started Dipity Lit Mag, or Dipity Literary Magazine in 2022 of September. On the 3rd or 4th. It was technically in between there because it was around very late at night, around midnight, I think. And if you don't know, Dipity is short for serendipity. So, yeah, some lit mags are named after books, some are named after loved ones, or some are just really fun names, You'll come across some really cool ones. I always smile at some of the names. So, I mentioned Taco Bell Quarterly, and there are others that focus on nothing but horror poetry, comedy poetry, and car poetry, travel poetry. The list goes on, there are a lot of themed ones out there, nature-focused ones. And yeah, you can have a lot of fun with the name of your lit mag or journal. That's the starting point, of creating it. And you want to think about what topics and genres you want to do, because your name has to really match that. I don't know, guys, when you hear Dipity, what do you think? I think fun. That's what I think typically. And for a while, last year I was rewatching, I'll share with you guys, Legend of Korra. It was like, there was a line in there. It was like, take a Dipity dip, and I was laughing. And, yeah, I started noticing how many, places I had seen, just Dipity mentioned actually in the past years of my life. Even when I was younger, I didn't really recall that until, rewatching some stuff. Even the Eiffel 365 song, I used to think it used to say dip down instead of it says deep down, right? The song's deep down. So, yeah. And, so your name is so important, right? You don't have to, some places do, over time, in the long run, they do end up trademarking their names. I've seen some places do that, there are cases where I've seen magazines have, or some places or brands have legal disputes over names. So just be mindful about that. And I did technically go through a trademark process over one of the things I named. It was a very messy process, and I didn't go through with it. It can be several $1,000s of, filing fees and stuff, and submission fees for all of that, to get it finalized. So you gotta have the funds to do it. Absolutely, yeah. But, if you're just starting out, don't worry a whole lot about that. Just, get the name going, figure out, the subject matter, what you want to focus on, all unthemed, right? Or do you want to do a mix of themed and unthemed calls throughout the year? We do a mix throughout the year at Dipity, and with our relaunch, our legacy issues I'll share, our first issue was unthemed. Our second one was a mix of themes because we let others choose from a list that I made. So it was mostly dinosaurs and Greek mythology combined, and some fun ones, medieval knights, antique poetry, cat poetry. So yeah, a lot of different themes. Definitely tried to have fun with it. And yeah, so once you figure that out, you have to determine whether you're going to open it up to just local state submissions or only submissions within the country. Like, are you going to do only U.S. submissions? If you're in Canada, only Canada submissions? Or are you going to open it up to, poets internationally all over the world? So we do international submissions at Dipity, and it's very cool to see writers from all over the world submit. I initially started in taking things through a Google form, and via email, sending acceptance letters and things like that. It becomes tough to juggle. So I would highly recommend you, invest in a submission management system. There are ones way cheaper than, Submittable and some of the other ones. You can get a discount if you're part of the CLMP membership, to Submittable, which is really nice. Now, Dipity currently uses Submittable, and prior to that, I mentioned I was on a Google form intake system for a while briefly. Then I used Oleada, Oleada. Now, some places still use that, and it is a fairly good submission system, but at the time, it was lacking some of the features I really wanted to see. So, yeah, we're with Submittable now. It's good for organization, managing, especially if a lot of categories and buckets, and you need to keep track of all of that and, have an archival system. More recently, Submittable has limitations. I was going to do a separate episode on submission managers, and maybe I still will, but Submittable has, limitations on, things like the number of buckets you can have, and there's certain features you have to upgrade to get, and then the cost becomes quite astronomical, right? And the CLMP membership is essentially a basic plan, right? So that is a discounted plan through that for Submittable. So yeah, otherwise, again, it costs, $10,000 a year or something, or it can be way more than just, $30 a month. It can be way more than that. Some submission management systems are $75 a month. It really depends on your volume of submissions and everything. Some places will take that in consideration. Duosuma isn't too bad. I'd say I haven't used it a bunch, but I heard good things about it. And, most places just take a percentage of the submission fees for the month. And some places don't, some submission management systems don't take away from tips, but some places do. So you really have to look at that. But yeah, Oleada's good. And more recently, we're migrating to Subfolio. So check that out if you're listening to this, and I'll maybe cover submission management systems in a separate episode. So back to starting Lit Mag. Yeah, so once you figure out, your submission management system, where you're going to accept submissions from, you really have to, fledge out your, whether they're going to be online or solely print or a mix of print and online. Now, there are publications out there like Substacks, Lit Mags like that. They have several thousand subscribers, and they do a mix of, paywalled posts and non-paywalled, or some do no paywall. We don't do a paywall on our Substack, and we don't have several thousand subscribers as of, currently 2025. But, you just have to grow really slow, and a lot of artists and writers will say that, it takes time to grow. There's not anything, things go viral sometimes, but in reality, a lot of lit mags and journals, it takes time to develop issues, and you have to really grow slow. And once you get, I made Dipity's issue templates from scratch. So once you get a layout down and your sections and everything, you can replicate that across issues. Now we're going through a relaunch, so I have to rethink things a little bit in our new direction. And I'll share that more on our channels and stuff. But yeah, main reason, if you're wondering why I stopped or, decided to stop at our legacy issues, is because it has been quite difficult for Dipity to get into places. We've gotten into a couple, but not any physical locations to my knowledge. I mean, it's possible, but I see some Ingram network orders, but you're never really told where they go or end up, So yeah, some places outright declined Dipity, saying they felt the content wouldn't be popular multiple times. And we were able to get in some free places to set up, digital subscriptions. But there are other places that charge you to upload, per page. So think about it, we're averaging about 174 pages. One of our issues was a little bit way under that because, some other life events had come up throughout the year for me and others on the volunteer staff. But the per page cost can be quite high, for uploads. And then that's more for you, out of pocket if you're going to do digital subscription platforms. There are some free ones out there, but they have to accept you. So, yeah. What else? I've seen lit mags, I mentioned Substacks. There's Medium. You could set up a Medium space. You could set up a website for it. You don't necessarily have to buy your domain right away, but it's a good idea to do so. I see a lot of WordPress, site creation, Squarespaces, Wix, and so many. So just choose one that you feel comfortable with. Lothlorien Journal has sort of like a lot of lit magazine journals have sort of like a blog type, publication space in a sense. Yeah. And I know a lot of poets, writers, artists, they like to have physical print copies. If you can't do that right away, that's okay. I see some places they sell PDFs of the, issues or they use platforms like ISSU or Yumpu, which we used briefly, but their cost was insanely high. We had good readership metrics actually through them. They were telling us we had hit 70,000, views. And now I think one of our issues was 100,000 views. One of the ones they let us keep up anyways. Otherwise, you have to pay for more issues to be up there and to maintain the library. Once you stop paying in some places, they remove you from the library, things like that. So, yeah. Anyways, a lot of factors to take into consideration. If you're going to do print issues and you're going to mainly stay, local printers, there's some that are really great that help with distribution and everything. Sometimes you have to order the exact number of issues, or they have a limited minimum quantity order required, and that can be very costly for print issues. And if you can't do that, you may want to go to the POD route, right? Print on demand. I won't cover print on demand here, but take that in consideration. Yeah. So, yeah, your name. I mentioned the submission intake system. You'll need to facilitate the platform, you're going to use, or the places, for sharing your publication. Not to say you can't have a Substack and a website like we do. You can, have multiple places for your publications, it's always a good idea to do that, to do print and online. Always have backups of everything and things like that. So what else? Let's see. Guidelines. So, if you're not sure where to start with guidelines and you want to be, sure about that, just look at examples at other lit magazine journals and then make your own categories and guidelines from there. And use it as an example, how many poems you're going to allow per submission window. When are your annual windows? Some places have certain months they're always open. Some places are open all year round. If you're going to be open all year round, you may want to consider, are you doing anything else besides this? Are you running a lit mag full time? I am not salaried through the lit mag. Although it says, in some places I'm the only paid staff member. Honestly, it's, I think we were averaging on our issues from sites like less than $100 a month. Sometimes we got nothing back or way under that. So, print on demand places, they take quite a bit, so yeah, it can be very tough. You really have to take in consideration, again, the length of your issues, the cost and everything. And, yeah. So I don't like paywalling a lot of stuff. Some places paywall their whole site and they paywall all of the content and leave just a few samples up. We don't do that. Mainly just our print content is paywalled. So, our podcasts are not monotonized, none of that to date. I couldn't even monotonize the podcast if I wanted to. There was like a technical glitch I'd come across and they said, oh, we're going to remove your account and other stuff. And I didn't want to do that. So I said, forget it, because it was like going back and forth for hours. So yeah, just ended up making the podcast free. Ads are stupid anyway, and I don't like doing that. So yeah. So a lot of our content is free to read and listen besides our print issues. And yeah, I think that's fair. Structures can change over time, but I really hate paywalls. So yeah, if you're not going to pay writers for their work, it's tough. It's tough really to, there's only a handful of places, very few. I think Chill Subs, or was it someplace else, they did this research and they said probably less than 100 places out there, maybe it was a few years ago, have no fees and pay writers for their work. There may be more out there today, but yeah, it's very hard to avoid, a zero fees. What we do at Dipity, we have a first-time submission free, first-time subs are free on most categories, and then second time or more, there's a fee. On some of them, we have an outright direct fee. So we used to have more categories without initial fee, but we had to change the structure over time. So I think that's fair, having first-time subs free, photography and art are free always to submit to. So, we don't have fees on every single category, and we have fee waivers from time to time that we, do on Windows. And, yeah. So think about that, you definitely want to, again, it becomes too tough, I think, as you grow to manage everything via email. Some places do that, though. So I would, again, highly recommend you invest in a submission management system. You get, your own domain. You don't have to, though. Some places have been running, with .wordpress.com at the end for quite a while, or, other places don't have their own domain name, and they've been running for several years, like that. So it's not absolutely necessary, but it does look better when you, don't have that at the end appendage to your lit mag or journal press name. And so monthly fees, right? You're going to have, monthly bills for, your windows and everything. I mean, in terms of site maintenance, keeping your website up and other things. If you're using Substack, if you're using Medium, there's really no fees associated to that, not to date anyway. And I mean, for Substack especially, I haven't used Medium a whole lot. I've tried Medium briefly. But yeah, there are other places you can set up, too. And so yeah, it doesn't cost a whole bunch to start an online lit mag journal. If you're going to dive into the print space a little bit, then that's where things can stack up. And honestly, a lot of lit mag journals and presses and chapbook presses, they are lose a lot of money, right? Sometimes because, not every single release is per se, keeps them in the green or out of the red. Some places I've heard some places are just breaking even constantly, or they're struggling to, again, get their foot in the door to physical locations and things like that. So yeah, a lot of lit magazine journals and presses depend heavily on grants, funding, and things like that, or self-funded, or, things like that. Yeah, so you might want to think about, if you're mailing things out to others, if you're setting up mailing lists and things like that, you want to look into maybe a terms of service page, and things like that. Usually you'll find those on the bottom of some sites and presses and things like that, and some larger ones. But yeah, so I think that's the main things, I can think of. If you can't pay writers for their work, some places offer in the form of payment, copies of the print issues or the print releases, a few copies, set number of them. And, there are quite a few no-fee places out there. And, so you just have to search again and things like that through the directories and databases of them. And you'll find them. Always, before starting a lit mag journal, I would highly recommend reading a couple lit mags out there, a couple ones that have been around a while, and both online and print, and it'll help you. It'll help you, figure out what you want to do if your own lit mag and journal and starting one. I'm, and the editor-in-chief of Dipity and Dipity Lit Mag, and you're bound to make mistakes along the way. Prior, I'll share, guys, some personal things here. So in September 2022, around the 3rd or 4th, when I started Dipity. Prior to that, a couple months, not too long before starting it, a couple months before, my aunt had passed shortly after being diagnosed with cancer. And it was incredibly difficult because I didn't really get to spend time with her. I think the last time I saw her in person was when I was very, very little, like in person in, New York when I was like 7. And, over the years, she sent me cards and things like that. And yeah, it's just very tough. And also, I'll share more recently, at the end of last year, December 2024, a few weeks before Christmas, and the month before my birthday, which is in January, my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So that's been incredibly tough. And I don't want to cry on this podcast or anything like that, but, it's been, the past 5 years, from 2020 to now, it's been a very, very series of tough years for me personally. I went through some rather traumatic events and weird things that I won't cover all here, because it's a very long and unusual story with a lot of pain and tears. I absolutely did cry in between things, with Dippy and other things going on in my life. Physically, I was undergoing a lot of challenges and some rather painful experiences. So, yeah, I love my parents. My parents don't per se love poetry a whole bunch, and that's okay. It's not everyone's cup of tea. But, occasionally I share pages of the issues with them, and I hand them some of my chapbooks and they look at them. So, they do pay attention a little bit, but they're not, closely following like my podcast or reading the issues end to end or anything like that. But, they see it more so as a hobby and a side thing, right? Because it's not, per se, it's, a lot of lit mags and journals are on shaky ground, because of the finances and stuff and all of it, right? And the sales numbers, right? So that is partly why we're doing, a relaunch, because of the things I'm seeing with our readership and things like that. In total, how many issues and of my own personal work have I sold together collectively? Probably somewhere between, maybe 500 to 600 copies. And that's not too bad considering, I didn't invest in thousands of dollars in marketing. I did do marketing on my personal collections when I started way back, writing poetry again. And those in-print ads and other stuff, all the other things I tried didn't work, and I did end up losing quite a bit. Because ads and stuff, there's even ads for like lit mags and journals that you can partake in the community. Sometimes they have free ad spaces, and oftentimes it's a fee. I know some places they charge, several $100s for an ad space or full page, or it can get up to the 1,000 range, for some of the larger magazines. So yeah. And yeah, I didn't really see much from that. I think, there's some online ads and spaces you can rent out. I think those are better. I haven't really ever seen a whole lot with, traction on in-print ads, but I know like we've done some like book rec sections in Dipity, and I know some poets saw quite a few sales because we had done that, from certain regions and things like that. Because of, our issues, and that was great to see, not all, I am not aware if it happened to everyone or if, I have seen poets support one another, whoever's been in the issues collectively and things like that. So that's great to see, that others, followed each other and really, read the issues and everything. So thankful and grateful for anyone who's ever bought, one of our issues, and they're now considered legacy issues because they're the first 5 in our series when we started. So now we'll be doing a relaunch and back at square one. But I think sometimes, lit mags and journals go on a break briefly and they refocus and they come back stronger, or things like that, or even brands, and things like that. So yeah. A lot of times we see lit mags and journals just drop off the face of the earth. And usually that's due to life events or other things coming up it could be the founding member's life or multiple on the staff, again, as I mentioned. So, yeah, running a lit mag is not easy. It is a lot of hard work, right? You have to stay on top of things, the queue and everything. We've never accepted translations, but I've done translation, things with poets in the community, like in our earlier podcast episodes, of Hummingbird Blink and things like that. And it was so cool to hear that. So, we don't do a whole lot of visual poetry, but, going forwards, that may change. We'll see, with the relaunch and stuff. I'll share with you guys, I'm a very visual person, I'd say I've done more art in my life than writing. Past 5 years has been especially difficult for me and rather heartbreaking events. I haven't drawn at all, in the past 5 months, not 5 months, 5 years, 5 years. Yeah. So, yeah, mainly because of physical things that have happened and some rather traumatic experiences back to back. But I can do, I've done, visual designs, our layouts. I do all of our social media and our podcast and video editing. I've done absolutely the best I can, despite all of the things I'm going through physically. Pretty tough. Again, so yeah, the last 5 years, I would say, were tough. And I started Dipity in 2022. So I felt like Dipity was, again, a source of light for me, in a sense. And it really kept me going. If I sit around and do nothing, I'll lose my mind, right? So I was cooped up in bed for quite some time while doing the Hummingbird Blink podcast, especially when I started that. And it led up to Dipity in a sense, because I was like submitting to places, and then, I wanted to share this work further, and I started Lit Mag, and it all went from there. So, yeah. I would say, if you have friends, who live nearby you, or not even, we have an international volunteer staff of readers in different parts of the States, and we've had volunteers from Australia and Portugal briefly and things like that. So, yeah, reach out to your friends, see if they're interested in helping you out, or some family or friends or cousins or things like that. I don't have any close contact with cousins or anything like that, or, a wide range of network of friends per se in, where I am, because I moved from my home state. But, I, found a community of writers, and everyone's been so supportive, and, I've formed really meaningful connections and friendships. I wish, they weren't so far away. So it's been tough, so, and the physical challenges I have. So I don't really travel, I haven't traveled anywhere in the past few years, at all, things like that. So, yeah. Anyways, with a reading team. So if you're going to accept international submissions, or you see submissions pick up, down the way, with a volunteer staff, and, you can't pay your volunteer staff. You may see sometimes when we started Dipity, quite a few volunteers had dropped off, or they weren't maintaining contact fast enough, or they, kept saying they were interested but never really hopped in. And, sometimes that happens where they end up deleting their own account and they disappear and you never hear from them again. So things like that happen, and life events and career changes and focuses, right? It's hard, if it's not a paid position, then others usually have to, adjust their priorities and focus on their, career and their job and their, their life. So, there are a lot of volunteer readers who, per se, are at different points in their life. We have some volunteer team members who are, retired or in school, so they're juggling that. So I'm totally flexible. That's why I say no set hours, because everyone's schedule is so different. There's different time zones. I'm totally flexible, as an editor on that, as long as others give me a heads up or make me aware of their schedule a little bit, and, you want to think about like your reply window, and, look at some of the windows, other places have, or what do you think would be manageable for you? If you're working, I don't know if you'll be running the Lit Mag full time, or if you have other jobs you're doing, or other work, you want to make sure you have enough time to carefully review submissions. Some places have a fast track option, 1 to 2 weeks or a month back versus instead of 3 to 6 months, so think about that. And it's awesome having a volunteer reading team. You don't feel alone, right? You don't feel alone, and you can ask them questions, and it's very helpful, to read the feedback of others and to take that in consideration. We do at Dipity a round system, so the poem goes through round 1. We have a couple of round 1 readers, we have a couple round 2 readers, and then I'm round 3. So if it makes it through all 3 rounds, that means it's up for final consideration. And ultimately, I take into consideration the notes of our readers, everything. Some places in Lit Magazine journals, they also have scoring, and or they use a thumbs up or thumbs down button, or they use a number system. You can consider it like a voting block, or like your poem is going through rounds in the ring, like a boxing match, like let's get ready to rumble, or no, more so maybe Survivor CVS, like the where they cast the final votes and things. I think that's more close to what it is, right? But we're solely looking at, the writing in a lot of categories. I conceal the cover letters for our initial rounds of reading teams, and we only verify that stuff at the very end, at the final round. And, so I think it helps to have multiple rounds and to do blind reading. Not all of our categories are like that, again, like with interviews, podcast and audio, and, photography and art. But, so it's like about half of our categories are like that. And, we have about 50% of our categories with no initial fee, and, the other half do. We used to have over 80% of our categories like that, but now we do more so. There's fee waivers for disabled writers, and on some of our categories. So I hate fees, and I know some places again paywall everything, so it's really tough. Funding is so hard for Lit Magazine journals. So So, there are times on social media you often see Lit Magazine journals saying, hey, we've opened up this donation window, and it's tough, so you might have to start like a Patreon or, some monthly support subscription system or something like that, if you can't self-fund it, or you don't have the funding or affiliation with any group, and if you're not a nonprofit. So a lot of things to take in consideration when you're running a Lit Mag and, journal press. Main thing is to, recognize you're bound, again, to make mistakes. I made so many mistakes, typos, page number alignment things when we started. I learned a lot, I didn't have any prior experience of like bookmaking or anything like that, Besides when I was younger, like when I was 11 or something, or way younger than that, I can't remember. I did this book of all my drawings and called it Salty Cartoons. That was the only thing I ever self-published, and a couple of other, digital books and stuff, I think through lulu.com, and some print stuff with my random writing and my, short stories and stuff, I think, But I learned a lot about, not just like magazine design, how I learned on the go myself, throughout my life. I've always designed things, and people have always told me I had a knack for visual design, but I, started off in IT and all of that, and I did enjoy IT, and but I've always really loved the world of art and design, and I've always been more so of an artist, I'd say, and I do the best I can when editing, and it helps to have others on the team, like an editorial assistant, or you're bound to miss things from time to time, by yourself. So it's good to have multiple readers, multiple sets of eye on the queue on submissions, and, take into consideration other suggestions and things like that, when it comes to editing, proofreading especially. It helps to have others proofread, because you're absolutely bound to miss things on that for sure. Yeah. It helps again to have like full previews of issues out to everyone if you're doing a print or digital issue, like ones they can flip through. Ask for any changes or revisions and go from there. There have been revisions requests after, release and things like that. Social media handles, you can't really do much. Those change constantly. So, yeah, you can't really do anything about that. It's hard. But yeah, always make sure others are really happy with the pages, and finalize everything, get their go ahead and go from there. And, yeah. So that's all I can think of. I hope this helps you. There are so many different platforms and spaces you can leverage to start a lit mag. You really have to just see what works best for you. Some are harder than others. Setting up a website, if you don't have you don't need a lot of like coding developing experience, but I have done in the past, coded websites from scratch, basic website design, HTML and stuff, and some basic programming languages, but I sucked at some of the more advanced ones and basically flunked on those. But I have some basic knowledge of those and troubleshooting various things like that in the IT world. But yeah, I have a challenge for myself to figure out how to code in a search bar. I don't know if I'll be able to do it for some of our, publication sections on our site. But yeah, so you can learn on the go, and you can learn a lot. And if you need help, again, I've seen so many fellow editors be very communicative to others in the community, specifically through the CLMP membership. They have a great network of where you can ask questions and say, hey, I'm looking for this, or I need advice. We've run into this issue. And usually others will all pull in with, at least someone will, and direct you to the right place. They have a lot of great lists, resources, and tips there. But usually, if you're starting off, and you can't afford membership fees and things like that, a lot of it's figuring it out on your own at first. And, you can totally reach out to others in the community, though, and I'm sure some will help you. But a lot of it will be, if you're starting off on your own, it's going to be hard. And you can do it. But definitely have to, be consistent, with your release schedules and stuff. It's hard. Sometimes, we have life events, and then sometimes you release, 2 issues a year, 3 issues a year. Sometimes it's 1. But you have to be consistent. Otherwise, some places will take you out, of your directories or you're listed and various platforms and spaces. So annual issues are typically easier to maintain, or 1 to 2 a year. I've seen some places that release, 6 to 7 a year, or a lot. And yeah, it's hard. If you're, don't have we don't have like a dedicated managing editor per se, or we have editorial assistants, so we don't have, dedicated social media managers or things like that. There are several other roles on an editorial team, and publishing team. So we mainly have poetry readers, editorial assistants, and me, on our art team, for example. And yeah, you can look at mastheads and, on different sites of lit mags and see the different roles, and look up, if you're not sure on listing openings on your team or things like that, or, the requirements of a role and things like that, or what it entails. There are a lot of good example descriptions out there, job descriptions, even volunteer descriptions you can use as a guide, or a foundation, for yours when you're having open calls for help and things like that. There's places on CLMP, if you do CLMP jobs for publishers, sometimes I see a lot of calls in Submittables Discover page too. And yeah. So yeah, I went into some other things here, but yeah. Starting a Lit Mag journal, right? You don't need several hundred thousands of dollars. Especially it's going to be an online only publication. If you get into print, yeah, it can be tough. You have to offer discounts sometimes for, if you're part of a membership, certain membership plans and things like that. You have to offer discounts to print issues if you're not going to send them out to others and things like that, and it can be costly if you want to send them out, right, to everyone's address, and depends how many are in the issue and everything. So, it can be very expensive, print issues and full color printing and all of that. So, yeah, there are some reasonably good places out there for printing. You have to compare places, compare. Always have backup places. I always have in case a couple places suddenly stop, or discontinue a certain format or style of printing. It happens, so you have to prepare and always have a backup location for printing, yeah. So I think that's all I can think of. And yeah, I hope this episode helped you. It was nearly 40 minutes long, and yeah, I could go into more things in terms of, starting a lit mag and things like that, but there are a lot of free tools and resources you can use to get going. There are free ways to intake submissions, email, very low cost submission management systems. Now, the price can change over time, but I'm saying as of 2025, these are fairly reasonably and low cost. Oleada, Duosuma, Subfolio, it all depends on your submission volume and things like that, right? And on some of them. So, yeah, and, consider, joining a membership, CLMP. That membership is, it's a yearly membership, and, it's not something mandatory, but it can be helpful, if you're starting off your own and if you want to network with other editors, publishers, if you want to show up for table events and things like that, totally. I'd highly recommend you look into that and do that, and yeah. If you want to go into print, something you may want to do is, I know some people start Kickstarter campaigns, crowdfunding before they start up anything, and have the funds ready, just emergency funds or funds to kick the project off, donation events and things, say, hey, I'm starting this project, and oftentimes you have to hit that exact number or you lose all of it, right, and things like that, and you have to, fulfill orders and things like that on projects like that and certain Kickstart campaigns and stuff. I don't really know how all that works, but yeah. So print can get complicated. It can, but it can be also a lot of fun to create physical copies of issues. So yeah, I hope these tips helped you. I can go into, submission management systems, the life of a poetry reader, other roles on the, editorial teams and publishing teams and lit mags, and further or later on, perhaps, I may go into some other topics, or maybe this was a good coverage enough, I guess. So yeah, I'll think of some other things to talk about on the next episode, and yeah, take care, yeah. P.S. guys, I know this episode ended up being super long, and I think I'm losing my voice a bit, but I just want to touch base on a few more things. So I mentioned, perhaps having a visual alongside each, publication, whether it be a short story or a poem, acceptance, it's not absolutely necessary. Again, sometimes the poem on its own is the visual itself, right? It stands on its own with the imagery there from the words. But it can be cool to include some sort of photograph or artwork. Now, ways to do that, at Dipity, for example, we have photography donation and art windows, for print issues, or if we did that for our legacy issues, right? I opened up calls like that. And yeah, also I do digital collages, for our online tank and things like that for every publication. I used to do video collages, but again, storage. So that's why I pivoted away from that. Now, what I see a lot of lit mags online do, online only ones, or sometimes they're a mix of online and print, but they leverage Creative Commons license, stock photos and things like that for their online publications. And then they always credit the photographer. And yeah, of course, it's, I don't like using very common images or things like that, by themselves online and things like that, because, you can see like how many people use that image already, and has been leveraged. But, sometimes it helps to have an additional, photo like that. But I suggest, to make your publication more unique, maybe consider, I've seen some places have a set of like a couple of artists that help with the artwork of their publication, or, some of the site, art elements and things like that. Thing about that, if you have like a long-term artist or one artist, right, and they, have life events or something comes up, right, then your sort of style and look of your issues sort of changes, right? So it's good to have multiple involved, perhaps. Yeah, just some things to take into consideration. You could do visual poetry, nothing but visual poetry publications too. I mean, that's cool. That's awesome. And yeah, so many different ways you could go about it. Just be very careful about, any images you're, licensing, purchasing, things like that. There are cases I've run into, some underlying images that weren't, out of their copyright protection status, or they weren't in the, license that was permissible, right? And, you have to be very careful about public figures, celebrities, and things like that, right? Otherwise, you'll get usually like cease and desist letters and stuff like that. I've never gotten a cease and desist letter, but, there are cases online, on the Fair Use Act when it comes to certain artworks and things like that. How far original is it and changed enough from the original image if there are edits done to it, right? So you have to be very careful on, underlying images you see artists using, and really scan and analyze it thoroughly. A good way to do that is to use Google image search, and you can drag and drop, the art or photograph in and see where else has it been, and that is very helpful too. There are a couple other, AI analysis tools and other things out there nowadays to identify that, even for writing. Some are paid tools. There are some free ones out there. So, yeah. We used, Qtext for checking things from time to time. That's Quetext. And a few other ones, a few other checkers for, the writing world and stuff. So, yeah, there are a lot of cases of plagiarism in the lit mag and journal world. On social media, you'll come across that a lot, several instances where someone's using different names and submitting and trying to get, the cash award amounts from that. And, and it's very messy for lit mags and journals, and it costs time and money sometimes to remove that publication, once they identify, that it was plagiarized or taken from another poet. So it's hard, for lit mags and journals to catch that all the time, especially if it was, in print and things like that. But, almost, they do the best they can. We do the best we can to catch those things and identify them. And if we're made aware of anything like that, you have to, take it down and, as soon as possible right away. So, yeah, I would say if you're going to be the editor of a lit mag or found one, again, it's good to offer a feedback option. And I think what really helped me, being comfortable giving feedback, I shared, I self-published some work when I was younger, somewhere between age 7 and 11. One was titled Salty Cartoons. And I think I had a drawn fly on it and stuff. It was under my, my full name, right? My nickname's Jazz, by the way. My actual name and my pen name is Vevna Forrow. So, so I published a bunch of random stuff, short stories, everything, half-baked things even. And then some point in time, I published a poetry collection. And it was had been sort of put together because of high school project. I took all those poems in the project, made a few new ones, and self-published them on Smashwords, I think, first. And then I went on to Kindle and put it as like another collection, Extinct Poetry, I think, or something, Extinct. And the cover was like from a road trip of either from Arizona or Nevada. I think it was actually from Nevada, which is, funny. And it was sort of like a railing banister twisted sideways, and you could see through like the desert land or something. Definitely was from one of our road trips, I remember. So I think it was, back then I'd used quite a few road trip photos for the covers of my self-publications, and not always, but yeah. Anyways, I think, after that, what I'm trying to say is I joined up, on several writing communities, like online spaces. One I never forgot was inkpop.com, and then that merged or went through a merger with figment.com. And Figment was one really stellar writing community. I, took the time to give feedback and comments on others' work. I even participated in a lot of the cover, design contests. I took cover design requests oftentimes for writers in the community for their novels, their poetry collections, their short stories. And that was a lot of fun, to do that, to do cover design and things like that. I think that's when I really started to do like cover designs and, share my work a little bit more because of, that writing community space. And I had, prior to that, been on DeviantArt, and I was on DeviantArt for several years, but I took down my stuff. There were cases where I saw some of my work, I forgot to adjust the settings, but it was being downloaded, and some of my fan art, particularly, this is not a huge deal because it was fan art, but some of it wasn't. But like my Snoopy dog drawing, I used to do computer mouse drawn art, just with my mouse, a PC mouse. And the Snoopy drawing, I think, had accumulated 3,000 downloads. So I'm assuming a lot of you used it for their wallpaper or desktop wallpaper, things like that. But I had come across cases where my art was ending up in other locations, so I took it down, a lot of my stuff. But then a year or two ago, I opened another account and posted some of my stuff up there. And there's some other apps I posted my drawings and, cartoon sketches and marker art, in some spaces and digital art. And it's still available some places for print and things like that. But so I turned some of that into fun merch. So, if you run a lit mag or journal or press, it's a good idea to have like, a feedback option. And if you're trying to become comfortable doing that, I'm saying it can help, to join an online poetry community, an online writing community. There are several apps out there that are, community focused, and, you can give feedback, comments on writing and things like that. And, constructive criticism is always good, and, it can be hard to do that if you've never done that before, giving feedback to others. And again, I was mentioning earlier, I put some of my art on prints, but I was saying, I turned it into merch, and prints and stuff and print shops. And, You can create like a little merch gift shop for your lit mag or journal. I see a lot of places doing that, and it helps sometimes to have stickers, mugs, t-shirts. You can use those funds from those sales of that merch or swag to fund other things for your publication. Usually it's not much, but still it could help, and yeah. So do that, and when you run a lit mag or journal, right, whether you run it full time or not, if you have life events and things, I mentioned, the loss of family, and I also left out, on top of that, with recent events and things like that. But two of my dogs had passed, and it was pretty close together in a sense, like one of my chihuahuas I had for nearly 6 years had passed shortly after I moved to Nevada. And then not too long after that, a few years after that, my next dog also passed, it's quite suddenly. He was so young. So it was just really heartbreaking on top of that, and my aunt's passing and, and now my dad's diagnosis. So, and physical challenges I'm going through. So it's just a lot, back to back. And sometimes you have life events and you have to really, a lot of lit mags and journals go on breaks for things like that, or pause, or they have slower release windows because of that, or slower response times. And yeah, it's totally okay to take breaks from anything you do. And and to come back to things you love. Yeah. Several volunteer staff members, when they have life events, I'm totally I understand. So it's totally okay. It happens. So you just have to, keep going, and not give up, when things get really tough. But it's difficult. It's difficult. Absolutely. Sometimes you feel like, you're, as artists and writers, things you create, right? When you face a number of obstacles or life events back to back to back, it can be stressful, right? And, you're trying to, a lot of lit mags and journals try to, just grow and grow and grow, right? And to try to get the publication to as many as possible. So it can be tough to juggle things like that in life events. So you just have to, take a breath, right? And look back and look at everything and see, monitor the purchases of issues, monitor, your budgeting and everything like that. You have to really, learn when to, perhaps take things in a new direction, like we're doing with Dipity. And, so I am relaunching our series, after, considering a number of factors and things. And again, printing costs can be quite high, no matter if you're using print on demand or not, and some places have listing fees, or they tack on more fees to listings out in bookshops and stuff. And or sometimes you have to pay a fee in advance to have it listed, in a certain location. And there's some places that don't charge, right? They just take a percentage of the transaction, as I mentioned. So, you have to keep going. You have to, it's challenging, running a lit mag journal. And it's okay if you want to say, I don't want to do it anymore. I have other, things in my life I need to prioritize. But to me, I again mentioned I would love to run Dipity for the next 30 or 40 years if I could, totally. I really love, running a publication and doing visual design work. It's a lot of fun. And so it's different for everyone, some others have career changes and different paths. And, so I've seen some editors, again, find others to run their lit mag or journal or press. And, or they're still involved in it in some way or form, just not, managing the editing and all of the, moving parts behind it as much anymore. So, if you start one and it ends up, you end up liking it, but you can't run it anymore, and you want to keep it going, consider like finding someone, a close friend or someone in the community, do interviews and things like that to keep it going. And yeah, but if you can keep it going, just know that it's okay to take breaks. Oftentimes we see, again, Lit Mag's journals say, I'm going on a hiatus, or we're going on a hiatus. And sometimes that, for a lot of others, that may be indicative of that the Lit Mag or journal may be closing down, but that's not always the case. No, sometimes they just take really long breaks. I've seen some places come back after, 1 to 2 years or several years, and they started their series up again. So, just know it's okay. Just make everyone aware that, there are, breaks. And I know some places just drop off the face of the earth and we never hear from them again, and, we wonder like what happened to that publication and stuff. So, yeah, it's always sad to see things like that. So, yeah. Anyways, this was a super long episode, and I apologize again, but I hope, this helped you, and me discussing and sharing things, I've gone through personally, and also, as an editor of a magazine. And again, you don't need like 30, 40 years of experience to start one. You can learn on the go totally, and there's always, various others in the community space or publication space that, will totally, they'll let you pick their brain and, try to get resources or ask questions. It's very beneficial to always ask and to, and to learn on your own too. I made a lot of, hiccups and things along the way, and I honestly did the best I could, considering everything that was going on, with me physically and in my life, personally. So, yeah, so I just wanted to share all of that, and take care, yeah, guys. So we'll wrap up this episode and move on to the next one, yeah. And I'll try to make these a little bit more bite-sized. I'll try. Thanks so much for listening again, yeah. And I will perhaps cover some of the other roles in, the Lit Mag or journal, or, some submission management systems a little bit more in detail, or some other topics. We'll see. I will come up with something.